The knock came just after midnight. It wasn't loud. Just 3 weak taps, as if the person outside no longer had the strength to raise a hand. Elias Carter almost ignored it. Nobody visited an isolated ranch that late unless they carried trouble with them. In the Wyoming Territory, trouble usually arrived with a gun. He reached for the revolver hanging beside the door before lifting the lantern. "Who is it?" No answer. Only the wind. He slowly opened the door. A young woman stood there, soaked from freezing rain, her dark hair clinging to her face. One sleeve of her dress was torn, and her hands shook so badly she could barely keep herself standing. She looked up with frightened eyes. I'm sorry," she whispered. I think I have the wrong house." Before Elias could answer, her knees gave out. He caught her just before she hit the porch. She was burning with fever. He carried her inside without another word. When she woke hours later, sunlight spilled across the cabin floor. The smell of coffee drifted through the room. For a long moment she stared at the unfamiliar ceiling. Then panic flooded her face. She reached for the small knife hidden inside her boot. "You can put that away," Elias said from the stove without turning around. "If I wanted to hurt you, I wouldn't have waited until morning." She slowly lowered the blade. "You really don't know who I am?" "No." She studied him carefully. Most men asked questions before offering kindness. This one hadn't asked any. "My name is Clara." "Elias." Silence settled between them. She looked toward the door. "I should leave. You can barely stand." "I'll manage." "You'll die before sunset." She hated that he was probably right. He placed a bowl of hot stew in front of her. "You don't owe me your story." She looked surprised. "You aren't curious?" "Everyone running from something has a reason." That answer nearly made her cry. Because for weeks, nobody had spoken to her with kindness. She finally picked up the spoon. The warmth spread through her body like hope. 3 days passed. The storm refused to end. Clara remained at the ranch, helping with simple chores despite Elias insisting she rest. She repaired torn shirts, collected eggs, fed the horses. The little cabin no longer felt empty. Elias noticed himself listening for her footsteps. He hadn't realized how silent life had become after losing his wife 5 years earlier. He had buried more than a woman that winter. He had buried laughter, conversation, dreams. Clara noticed the loneliness too. "You built all this yourself?" "My father started it." "And after he passed?" "I stayed." "Alone?" He nodded. "You never remarried?" He looked away toward the mountains. "Some people only get one great love." Clara lowered her eyes. "So do some people." That answer stayed with him. Days became a week. The fever disappeared. Color returned to Clara's face. Sometimes they laughed over burnt biscuits. Sometimes they rode together checking fences. Sometimes they simply watched sunsets without speaking. Neither realized how quickly strangers had become companions. Until one afternoon, a rider appeared on the hill. Clara froze. Her face turned white. Without thinking, she grabbed Elias's arm. "They found me." "Who?" "I have to leave." "You can barely outrun a horse." "I can't stay here." The rider disappeared behind the trees. Elias quietly reached for his rifle. "You aren't leaving." She stared at him. "You don't even know what I'm running from." "No." "You don't know if I'm guilty." "I don't." "Then why help me?" He looked directly into her frightened eyes. "Because fear like yours doesn't belong to someone chasing innocent people." Tears filled her eyes. For the first time in months. Someone believed her before hearing her defense. That evening she finally told him everything. She had worked as a schoolteacher in a nearby town. The wealthy landowner, Victor Harlan, had wanted to marry her. She refused. Weeks later, money disappeared from his office. Victor accused Clara of stealing it. The sheriff believed the richest man in town. Nobody believed the poor schoolteacher. She escaped jail before reaching trial. Now bounty hunters searched every county. I didn't steal anything. I know. You don't even know me. I know enough. She couldn't hold back her tears anymore. Elias gently placed his hand over hers. You knocked on the wrong door. She smiled through tears. Maybe. Outside. Several horses quietly surrounded the ranch. Neither of them heard the click of rifles being loaded. The first gunshot shattered the silence before dawn. The cabin window exploded into splinters, sending Clara to the floor with a frightened cry. Elias grabbed his rifle and pulled her behind the heavy oak table. Stay down. Another shot tore through the wall. A rough voice echoed across the yard. Elias Carter. Hand over the fugitive, and nobody gets hurt. Elias recognized the voice. Jed Collins. A bounty hunter who had once been thrown out of town for shooting an unarmed man. There are 5 of them, Elias muttered after peeking through a crack in the shutters. Clara's face drained of color. They'll kill you because of me. They'll have to get past me first. They're not worth dying for. He looked at her, calm despite the danger. Maybe not. A faint smile crossed his face. But you are. Before she could answer, another bullet struck the door. Elias fired once. A scream followed outside. The riders scattered behind trees and wagons. They'll wait, Elias said. Men like Collins never rush when they think fear will do the work. He was right. The ranch became silent again. Too silent. Hours passed. Neither of them moved far from the windows. Clara kept watching Elias. His hands never shook. His breathing stayed steady. Yet she noticed something else. Whenever he thought she wasn't looking, he touched the old wedding band hanging from a chain around his neck. You still miss her? He nodded. Every day. What was she like? He smiled for the first time that morning. She laughed at everything. Even you? Especially me. Clara smiled softly. You still love her. I always will. She looked down. I don't want to replace anyone. His eyes met hers. I never asked you to. Those words somehow hurt more than if he had. Because somewhere inside her heart, she had already begun wishing for something impossible. That night, Elias slipped outside through the back of the barn. Clara grabbed his arm. No. They're watching the house. You'll be killed. I need to move the horses before they set fire to the stable. She refused to let go. For a long moment, neither spoke. Finally she whispered, Please come back. He gently squeezed her hand. I intend to. He disappeared into the darkness. Minutes felt like hours. Then. Gunfire erupted. 1 shot. 2. 3. Clara's heart nearly stopped. She wanted to run outside but knew she'd only make things worse. Then the barn door opened. Elias stumbled inside. Blood covered his sleeve. You've been shot. It's only my arm. Only. As though a bullet were nothing more than a scratch. She helped him into the cabin. Carefully she cleaned the wound. He watched her trembling hands. You're crying. I'm angry. At me? At you. He laughed despite the pain. You nearly died. I didn't. You could have. But I came back. She looked into his eyes. I don't know what I'd do if you didn't. The room fell silent. Neither dared say what had almost been spoken. Outside, Collins smiled in the darkness. He had seen enough. He no longer needed to capture Clara. He only needed to use Elias against her. Morning brought an unexpected visitor. An elderly preacher rode toward the ranch carrying a white cloth. Collins allowed him through. The old man entered the cabin. I've come with an offer. Elias didn't lower his rifle. I'm listening. They'll spare your life if you surrender the young woman. Clara quietly stood. I'll go. No. They'll burn this place to the ground. No. You can't keep risking everything. He stepped between her and the preacher. Tell Collins something for me. What? If he wants her. Elias cocked the rifle. He'll have to bury me first. The preacher slowly nodded before riding away. From the hill, Collins laughed. So be it. Then he ordered his men to bring the dynamite. Clara had never hated herself more. Every stick of dynamite laid around the ranch felt like another death sentence she had carried to Elias's doorstep. If I hadn't knocked on your door. He interrupted gently. You'd be dead by now. And now you might be. He looked toward the mountains where the first light touched the peaks. I've lived alone for 5 years. She frowned. I wasn't living. She couldn't answer. Because she understood exactly what he meant. They worked through the afternoon, preparing for the attack. Water buckets stood ready. Extra ammunition covered the kitchen table. The horses had already been released into the valley. If the cabin burns, Elias said, head for the creek. What about you? I'll be behind you. You promise? I promise. She wanted to believe him. But promises made before a gunfight were fragile things. Just before sunset, Collins called out once more. Last chance. Elias remained silent. A match struck. The first explosion shook the earth. The barn burst into flames. Another blast ripped apart the chicken coop. Smoke swallowed the ranch. Collins's men charged. Gunfire erupted from every direction. Elias fired with calm precision. One rider fell. Another turned back. Clara loaded rifles as fast as she could. The smoke thickened until she could barely breathe. Then she heard glass break. One of Collins's men had slipped inside through the rear window. He grabbed Clara by the arm. Found you. She fought wildly, kicking and clawing. The man laughed. You've got spirit. Suddenly a shovel crashed across his back. Elias pulled Clara free. Run. They raced through the smoke toward the creek. Bullets tore through the trees. Behind them, the cabin they had shared for only a handful of days was swallowed by flames. Clara looked back with tears in her eyes. I'm sorry. It was only wood. It was your home. He looked at her instead of the fire. My home isn't a building anymore. She felt her heart stop. Before she could respond, another rifle cracked. Elias staggered. Blood spread across his shirt. No. He collapsed to one knee. Clara caught him before he fell completely. We have to keep moving, he whispered. I can't leave you. You won't. She wrapped his arm around her shoulders and somehow found the strength to carry part of his weight. They disappeared into the forest as darkness covered the valley. Far behind them, Collins stared at the burning ranch. He smiled. They won't get far. But he had made one mistake. He believed he was chasing two frightened people. He didn't realize they were no longer running because of fear. They were running because they had finally found someone worth fighting for. The mountains swallowed them before sunrise. Every step Elias took left drops of blood on the rocky trail. Clara kept one arm around his waist, refusing to let him fall. "You need to leave me," he whispered. She shook her head. "I'm not losing you. You'll never outrun Collins like this." "I don't plan to outrun him." He looked at her in surprise. "I plan to survive him." By noon they reached an abandoned trapper's cabin hidden among tall pines. The roof sagged, and the windows were broken, but it offered shelter. Clara eased Elias onto an old bed. His skin was burning. The bullet had passed through, but fever had begun to take hold. She boiled water, cleaned the wound again, and tore strips from her own dress for fresh bandages. When he finally opened his eyes, she was sitting beside him with tears quietly rolling down her cheeks. "You should have kept that dress." She laughed through the tears. "I'd rather have you." He reached for her hand. "I never thought I'd hear someone say that again." She held his hand against her cheek. "I've been afraid every day since I left my town." She paused. "But I've never been as afraid as I am now." "Why?" "Because now I have something to lose." Their eyes met. No more words were needed. He slowly brushed a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I tried not to care." "I know. I failed." "So did I." She leaned forward and kissed him. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't desperate. It was gentle. A promise born in hardship. When they pulled apart, neither spoke. Outside, snow began falling. For one peaceful hour, the world forgot them. Then a horse whinnied. Clara hurried to the window. Riders. 6 of them. Collins had found the trail. "We have to go," she whispered. Elias struggled to stand. "I'm coming. You can barely walk." "I won't leave you." The cabin door burst open before they could move. Collins stepped inside with 2 rifles pointed at Elias. Quite the reunion. His grin widened. "I almost feel guilty interrupting." Clara stepped in front of Elias. "You want me?" "I do." "Then let him go." Collins laughed. "You still don't understand." He slowly removed a leather pouch from inside his coat. He dumped hundreds of dollars onto the floor. "The stolen money." "I stole it myself," he said calmly. Clara stared in disbelief. "What?" "Victor Harlan paid me to make sure everyone believed you did." Elias clenched his fists. "You framed her." Collins shrugged. "Rich men don't like hearing the word no." Clara's knees nearly gave out. Her entire life had been destroyed because one powerful man couldn't accept rejection. Collins aimed his revolver. "The sad part is, no one will ever hear the truth." The gun fired. But it wasn't Collins who had pulled the trigger. A deafening shot echoed from outside. One of Collins's men collapsed. Then another. The remaining bounty hunters spun around in panic. Sheriff Thomas Reed rode into the clearing with 6 deputies behind him. "Drop your weapons." The old preacher from the ranch had kept riding after leaving Collins. Instead of returning home, he had ridden straight to the sheriff in the next county, a man known for honesty rather than fear. Collins tried to escape through the back door. Elias, despite the pain in his side, tackled him to the ground. The 2 men crashed through the broken doorway. Collins reached for his knife. Elias caught his wrist. The blade slipped into the snow. "You ruined enough lives." Collins reached for a hidden pistol. Before he could fire, Sheriff Reed's voice thundered. "Don't." Collins ignored him. One shot rang out. Then silence. Collins lay motionless in the snow. The mountains became still once more. Spring arrived slowly. The snow melted from the hills, feeding the streams that wound through the valleys Elias had known since childhood. The truth spread faster than the thaw. Sheriff Reed uncovered Victor Harlan's records, false payments, and secret letters. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Victor confessed to framing Clara to force her into a life she had never wanted. The charges against her disappeared. For the first time in months, she walked through a town without lowering her eyes. People who had once turned away now apologized. Some cried. Others simply couldn't meet her gaze. Clara accepted their words with grace. But she never returned to the little schoolhouse where her old life had ended. That chapter belonged to someone else. One afternoon she rode to the blackened remains of Elias's ranch. Only the stone chimney still stood. Wildflowers had already begun growing through the ashes. Elias walked beside her. "I thought seeing this would hurt." "It does." He nodded. "So why are you smiling?" She slipped her hand into his. "Because this isn't where our story ended." He looked across the land. "I've been thinking. That usually means work." He laughed. "It does." "What kind of work?" "A new house." She smiled. "On this land?" "Unless you'd rather live somewhere else." She looked over the rolling fields, the distant mountains, and the place where one frightened knock had changed everything. "I knocked on the wrong door." He shook his head gently. "No. You were looking for another house." "I was." "You found your home." Her eyes filled with tears. "So did you." Together they began rebuilding. Neighbors arrived with lumber. The old preacher brought windows. Sheriff Reed delivered 2 sturdy horses, saying they had been abandoned after Collins's gang was arrested. Even strangers lent their hands. Not because they pitied Elias and Clara. Because they believed in them. By summer, a new ranch stood where the old one had fallen. It wasn't grand. It didn't need to be. Every board had been raised by honest hands. Every nail carried a memory. One evening, as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Elias led Clara to the porch. He seemed strangely nervous. She smiled. "I've seen you face 6 armed men without trembling." "I know. But this is harder." He reached into his pocket. There was no expensive ring. Only the simple silver wedding band he had worn around his neck since the day his wife died. "I carried this because I couldn't let go." His voice grew quiet. "I finally realized she wouldn't want me to live in yesterday." He looked into Clara's eyes. "She taught me what love is." He gently closed Clara's fingers around the ring. "You reminded me that love isn't meant to be buried." Tears streamed down Clara's face. "Elias. If you can forgive an old cowboy for taking so long to open his heart." He took a slow breath. "Will you spend the rest of your life with me?" She didn't answer with words. She threw her arms around him, laughing and crying at the same time. When she finally found her voice, it was barely a whisper. "Yes." The wind carried the sound across the valley. Months later, on a warm autumn afternoon, friends and neighbors gathered beneath the cottonwood trees beside the new ranch. There were no grand decorations. No wealthy guests. Only honest people who had witnessed 2 broken souls find their way back to life. As Clara walked toward Elias, she glanced at the sturdy front door of their new home. He caught her smile. "What is it?" She laughed softly. "I'm just thinking. If I had knocked on the right door that night." She looked at the man waiting for her. "I never would have found the life I'd been praying for." Elias took her hand. Together they stepped into a future neither of them had believed still existed. And every time the evening wind brushed gently against their front door, it sounded almost like 3 quiet knocks. The same 3 knocks that had once seemed like a terrible mistake. And had become the greatest blessing of both their lives.